Homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the interview room. What an amazing day it's been, and it's just going to get better for everybody. I want to introduce our amazing guest tonight. Those of you who have been here at this channel know who I'm talking about, and that's Dr. Burgess. And let me read just a little bit about Dr. Burgess, because she is not only an amazing human being, but she has done just invaluable work in the lanes that she not only researches, but all the victims and the lives that she's touched. So she's a renowned pioneer in the assessment and treatment of victims of trauma and abuse. Dr. Burgess is one of the original behavior science unit Mindhunters. She's the author of Killer by Design, Murderers, Mindhunters, and My Quest to Decipher the Criminal Mind. We have a link to her book in the description below. So at the end of this, make sure everybody gets over to Amazon and buys that book. You will be blown away. Among her many awards and accolades, in 2016, she was named a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing. She is a professor of psychiatric mental health nursing at Boston College and Cornell School of Nursing, and she is a professor emerita from the University of Pennsylvania. She received her bachelor's and doctorate degrees from Boston University and her master's degrees from the University of Maryland. At this time, she is currently teaching forensic courses such as victimology, forensic mental health, forensic science and forensic science lab, and wounded warriors in transition. And along with Linda Holmstrom, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Of Boston College, co-founded one of the first hospital basic crisis intervention programs for SA victims at Boston City Hospital. And you can see she's received numerous grants and authored many articles on the topic of SA, trauma, child SA, serial offenders, PTSD, and the list goes on. Her list of accomplishments and awards is unending. We are having the privilege this evening, ladies and gentlemen, on this channel of having Ann as our guest, and you get the opportunity to go one-on-one with her. So with that, I'd like to welcome Ann to the program. Welcome, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you very much, Chris. Happy
it is a lot going on there in Boston right now with the anniversary coming up. How are things shaping up there?
Yes, it's the 10th anniversary of the bombing for the marathon up in Copley Square, and that's on the radio a lot. They have some of the survivors that are speaking out, and it's a time to really honor the victims, as well as to remember the victims that lost their life. We had 3 that lost their life. There also were many that had very severe injuries. A lot of limbs were blown off in the blast, as you can imagine. And so we're very much remembering that. One of the things that our school did, our Dean Gennaro at the time said that the School of Nursing should do something in remembrance, and planted daffodils. There's on the route that the runners take, there's an island, and so much time was spent putting a lot of daffodil bulbs in, but it really works because they come right out. They're all in bloom right now along the at least the part by the Cannell School of Nursing. So it's a good remembrance, if you will, of what we were trying to do to help remember the victims.
That's amazing. So if anybody in the chat is running the marathon and you see those daffodils, now you know the story, the backstory behind them. So just what an amazing tribute to the event as a whole, and what a tragic event that was.
Horrible.
Just try, and this is why we're grateful that we have you here tonight, because you've been getting into the mind of these perpetrators. Really tell everybody, I want this kind of be, almost like a fireside chat, right? Where we're just kind of hanging out. And I know everybody always asks you about, the behavior science unit, but they don't really ask about, because I've done my homework on you, young lady,
Okay.
but they don't get into really what drove you to be Ann Burgess to this day. And, so I want to start off with your career in forensic nursing, and how did you, really kick that into high gear, and how did you get into that field?
Well, the way I got in, that wasn't my first choice. I loved playing the piano, and I had visions of being a great piano player. And I wanted to go to the conservatory. We have a wonderful conservatory in Boston for music. And so that was my dream, of being a concert pianist. And my mother didn't think that was such a great idea. So she wanted me to be more practical. So I thought, she said, well, how do you support yourself? And I'm thinking, gee, what does she think is going to happen to me? And so then my next thought was, I like playing jazz and that at that particular time. So I thought, well, I went to the Elliott Lounge. That was a hangout for many of the college students. And there was a piano player there. And I said, that's what I'll do. I'll be a piano player. And my mother said, in a bar? You're not going to do that. So I had to get much more realistic. So we have a number of medical people in the family. So I thought, in those days, women didn't go into any exotic fields, if you will. They went into teaching, or they went in to be a secretary, or they went in to be a nurse. And so they were having, I saw where this one school, you could be a nurse in 4 years. It used to be you had to go for 2 years, and then you had to do 3. It was all these years. It still is a problem in our field that you have to keep doing more and more, because you have to get the clinical in. So I said, well, I'll go to this one school, and it was Boston University. It's the only school I applied to, and luckily they took me, right? So that's how I got into nursing. You asked.
Oh, so where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the Boston area?
Oh, yes. I've always lived in Newton. So
okay.
I knew Boston University and, of course, all of that. So.
Okay. So it was almost like, okay, you've got the New England Conservatory of Music, and mom is going, I'm not really sure about that completely, but you then found yourself leaning towards the medical field. And
yeah.
And when you got into it, did you know right away this is where you was your destiny?
Well, yes, I did like nursing. I had an uncle that used to be a really country doctor. He'd go out and deliver babies. I think one year he delivered every youngster that graduated from the local high school. And so I'd go out and help him when he would deliver babies. So I had that experience. And then I had another uncle that was a surgeon, and typical surgeon, you get not too funny, he was a good uncle, but he had that attitude. And then I had I had several uncles that were doctors. And then I had one of my aunts was a nurse. So it's pretty natural that I go into that. And when I got into nursing school, the first thing they said, I think they do this all the time, is look to the left and look to the right, and you won't see them when you graduate, assuming that you're going to graduate. Well, that was about true. We started with 43 and we graduated in the 20s. I can't remember exactly how many. So
It's almost half the class.
about half the class. Yeah. Now we don't have those attrition numbers now that I've been, but back then we did. I don't know why, but a lot of young females, so pretty much all females. I don't remember any males in the field at that particular time. And it was hard. Don't forget, we had to do clinical, and you had to do night duty and morning duty and all kinds of things.
Now, did you select the field of forensic nursing, or were you kind of did you fall into it?
It found me. I didn't find it. There was no forensic nursing back when I was doing this. I just got into it doing the research. I met up with Linda Lytle Holmstrom, and she's the one that said, if you want to be an academic, which I had this, I was going to be at Boston College, and she said, you have to do research and you have to publish. And I said, oh, okay. So I took my cue from Linda. And so we did the study, we did the rape study. And then at the end of it, we wrote it up, got a lot of publications out of it. And I think it's one of the main reasons, outside of my nursing textbooks, that I was able to get tenure and promotion, which is the gold standard, if you will, in the academic world. So by that time, forensics was coming into the foreground. And because of the women's movement, don't forget, this was really a push by the women's movement to get this on the front burner.
Right.
Yeah. And so nurses, they were having trouble getting doctors to go in to testify that had examined the victim. Right. But they found that nurses, because they worked there, they were stationed there. See, the doctors rotated. They were just interns. So they rotated every 3 months. But the nurses, they could get to go in. And if they were as fact witnesses, they were fine. Because they just all they had to do was to read the report, so to speak, and document. And nurses are so good at detail and observing and documenting every little drop or anything. So it became a natural, and that's where the women's, it really, as the counseling center started, it was a natural. It was just a natural. And Linda and I did the counseling for the victims that we saw, but then we had to stop. That was not part of our academic duties. We're getting pretty tired. So we taught the nurses, and they carried on, and we supervised them. So it was a natural sign off for the program to continue at Boston City Hospital.
So you were a pioneer even back then to the now what we would call the Sark teams, right?
Yes. Yes.
So you guys just kind of really made it happen, and now it's just amazing. I mean, I can't tell you how many Sark teams I've had a chance to work with, and you're 100% right.
Yes, it was a wonderful. I think that's a main contribution for nursing, for them to be able to get into that field, label it, talk about it, and teach it and staff it. Yeah, it's really amazing. But don't forget, back when we were doing this, there was no DNA. It was just blood groups. Yes, you could type the victims if you had the blood into A, B, A, and O. I think there were 4 categories. And I can remember one nurse who was so angry at the awful rape that had occurred to this one patient that she said, I'm going to look under the microscope and I'm going to find one of those, one of the evidence piece that she said, I know I can find one. And she did. So
do you think any of your early work, I mean, because back then, to your point, it was hairs, fibers, blood type, and you guys were collecting it, bagging it and tagging it, as we used to say. Do you think any of that today is still sitting in the vault somewhere in the evidence lockers in Boston PD?
Oh, it is. In fact, there's a movement now for nurses to be able to keep the evidence rather than the police.
Oh,
Yes, I just saw that. That's really interesting. Some states are pushing towards that, which makes sense.
yes,
It really
absolutely.
makes sense. So, but of course, that's going to take legislation and so forth. But that's going to be interesting to watch.
That would be fascinating because at that point, hopefully, the next step would be to open up CODIS and a variety of other, software programs that maybe could do some matching
Sure,
across the country.
sure.
Well,
That might help. Yeah, that might help because don't forget, so many of these cases don't go anywhere, and the police never, or the evidence, the crime labs. I'm sorry, the crime labs don't get them unless the police have a possible suspect.
right.
So you're right that most of them, 95% of them, probably just stay on the shelf, and then they become, not that they become too old, but you run out of space.
Right, right. And then they accidentally get purged as well.
Yep.
Sometimes, yes. And which is always a tragedy.
Yes.
Interesting. So that work is pioneering in of itself. And then, so what led you? How did you get into, the behavior science unit? Who did John Douglas reach out, or how did that all come about?
No, another nurse. This is where nursing, and my whole point is nursing is very supportive of nurses.
Yeah.
Is Roy Hazelwood. In those days, and I think even today, the agents would go out and do what they call these road schools. Mm-hmm. And they would go and teach whatever the current, like hostage negotiations or right. Catching a bank robber or something. And so Roy Hazelwood was out in Los Angeles and doing his, I think he was doing hostage negotiation. And at the end of it, he simply said to the group, I've just gotten this new assignment. I'm going to have to teach rape investigation. And he says to this group of males, does anybody know anything about rape? So you can imagine dead silence. Nobody knew anything about rape.
Yeah, exactly.
So afterwards, this one female detective came up to him and said, I just read in my nursing journal, she was both a nurse and a police officer, about the rape victim in the emergency ward. She said, she's someone out on the East Coast. Why don't you give her a call? So he did. Roy Hazelwood called me up and asked if I'd come down and lecture on rape. And I said, well, I hesitated because in those days I was talking only to nursing groups and to rape crisis, all females. I wasn't talking to any. And I thought, and here was this big mandate that law enforcement was supposed to be up in the game in terms of understanding rape investigation. So I thought, well, I wanted to know what I said to Roy, I want to know what you're teaching down there. Sure, I'll come down. And that was it.
And how did that, because I'm assuming your premise there was to lay the foundation, not only in the victimology, but how did that spring load into the suspectology at that level early on?
Well, that was because my task was rape victimology, because the agents didn't talk to victims. They were out looking for a suspect. They were investigating. So they often wouldn't be talking, especially if it was a homicide. So the lucky thing was William Webster was pretty new in the game. And he had said, we're an academy down here. You've got to be teaching and doing research. And so each of the agents were supposed to do some research. And Roy spoke up and talked about what he wanted to study
serials.
No, well, he was interested in rapists,
Okay.
adults. It was Roy Ken Lanning that was doing the children, but he wanted to study autoerotic fatalities.
Oh, wow.
And there was dead silence.
Yeah.
And one time when he said that to one police officer, they said, we don't have many car fatalities down here. Yeah. I couldn't understand what an autoerotic fatality would be. I didn't know any of those. I'd never seen one.
Right.
And I knew this was a test. My first chapter in the book is they're always testing you to see whether you make the mark, so to speak. So I said, well, sure, we'll do it. And so Nick Roth was working with me at the time. He was a psychologist. It was wonderful. He's a great researcher and just a great person. You should have him on your show. But anyway, so we did the study for Roy. And Nick didn't like looking at dead bodies. And so we had to divide the task up. I would look at the crime scene and I would tell him what it was and he would code it. That was the way we worked out. Yeah. So that's why.
Was this pre or post the Boston Strangler?
Oh, post.
Interesting. Yeah. Were you able to at some point ever go back and kind of look at, how those crimes were being perpetrated?
Well, actually, the psychiatrist on the case lived right across the street from me, so I had been over to his house to talk about the case. So that was fun, So I knew that case, and but anyway, the backstory is they had to do some research, and so that's where I met Bob Ressler.
Right.
And Bob was scurrying around trying to think what his research was going to be, and he was looking at and decided to call his project Criminal Personality Study.
Okay.
And he was going out, and interviewing convicted offenders. And at the time, they were doing the assassins. They did Charlie Manson. They did Squeaky Fromm.
Yeah.
And so he also was given the task of having to teach at the academy criminology. And he said, Bob was a very practical person. He said, how can I teach something when I haven't even talked to a killer? So he wanted to talk to some murderers.
Right. And he needed the authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is how that all started. That was his project.
And were you able to accompany him into the prison system to interview those guys at that juncture of your career, or did that?
No. Okay. I was doing the methodology. My task was to just get the methodology, because when I would talk to him about what he was finding, I say, well, what questions are you asking? He said, I'm just getting them to talk. So that was the goal, get them to talk, which they did. Of course they would talk, but I said, you don't even know if they're telling you the truth. How are you matching it with anything? So that's where we came up with the 57-page questionnaire. And they had to read the records. The good thing about it is they could ask for a record and be on the desk the next day. It was amazing how they could get court records. It was really very, very helpful for the research process. So they could go into a case and they could tell. Remember they did this on Mindhunter on the Brutus case, where he says, I didn't murder that woman, and then they show the picture where his face is in the mirror, I think it was, of before killing her. So they could catch them right there. That's so good, having the ability to confront them, and with authority. That was the other thing, with authority. And John Douglas, he had to take a partner, which is what they generally do. So that's how Douglas was picked.
Got it.
Or volunteered. I don't know which. Yeah.
Got it. So you were even pre-Douglas. I mean, when the stuff kind of kicked off.
Yes.
And isn't it fascinating? You were dealing, and I'm trying to be sensitive, right, to our audience to make sure that, because I'm sure there are some folks in our audience listening tonight that have been, violently violated. And so I want to be I'm very considerate and sensitive to that. But here you are listening to the brutality of these events, gaining all of that knowledge and then sharing it in a controlled setting. And now an agent goes in, gets that side of the puzzle. What was the temperature of the research in the early days when you started to combine the two?
Well, we did it right from the start in terms of when I would lecture on rape victimology, I would give the victim's story. And at the time, Nick Roth was teaching with me, and he would give the offender side. And then we would present this to the class. And they had to figure out what was what, because you got
Right.
one story and you got another story. So you began to see the misperceptions of the offender.
Interesting.
Because the victim, I was trying to teach the victims is how you get the interview with the victim.
Right.
Just coming in and saying I was raped tells you nothing. It really doesn't tell you anything.
Right.
And so, as Jeff Wood, who now does a lot of interviewing, gets it, you get the story 4 times. You get the story, tell me what happened.
Mhm.
Then you say, okay, I want to go back and maybe ask a few questions. So you get the story and you begin to gently kind of say, well, then what might have happened? Or did anything else happen? Then you get the 3rd time is where you get it, where you really start challenging some of that to make sure that she's going to hold up or the
Mhm.
story. And then the 4th time is more of the exit and the therapeutic part.
Yeah,
It's very, you've got to teach them how to do, and it's what Hazelwood called a behavioral oriented interview.
right.
What was the behavior of the offender? And then what did the victim do in response?
Yeah, it is a cognitive process that has a lot of patience has to be in the interviewer because there's so much violence and that compartmentalization of that violence, and then trying to help them understand it and get them through those those 4 steps. It really is an art. It's an art.
Well, many times, depending, that's where we came up with the typology of the offender.
Right, the 4 typologies. Right.
The victim, a lot of these offenders would ask questions to her, being very inquisitive, and she might not reveal that unless it's clearly asked. This is a set of questions I have to ask you. What did he say to you? How did he say it? What was your response? And that really opened up a much healthier and wider picture of the whole scenario, especially from the offender. And then you had information to give for if it was going to be prosecuted.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, I've got a ton of questions, so I'm going to go to the next one real fast. Okay. As co-author of Forensic Nursing, what are the biggest challenges facing forensic nursing today? And how do you envision the field progressing and evolving?
Well, the challenges have to do with how well they're able to get the information from the victim. So we have to have them well prepared for the victim standpoint, and to get as much information that's not going to be negative to the victim on the offender, because you really need both sides. Doesn't have to necessarily be in the report. That's one of the things of how to write a report that is helpful to a prosecutor. And the second part, of course, is how to collect the evidence. Nurses are really good at that. That's not necessarily a problem once they know what to do and you have instructions and so forth. But in terms of research, I think the next step is this research that's using genealogy is quite interesting. Yeah. And there have been a number of cases, where that has gone on. Even the Kohberger case I have no idea if it will be used in the suspect that they have. But all of those are very interesting, I think, possible research areas. Touch DNA, certainly at the time, I can remember one case where the nurse took swabs because she felt that the touch DNA was going to be finally authorized in Virginia. It happened to be a Virginia case. And sure enough, it was by the time they got the offender and it came to trial. So it's very helpful. So it's things like that. The nurses are the ones that are going to find out and say, we need to do more in this area. We need to study that. So I'm looking very much forward to nurses being able. We have all of us, I'm a SANE, sexual assault nurse examiner, and we have you get questions daily. So we can keep up with everybody around the country, what the questions are, if you will, in the field.
That people are so lucky to be under your mentoring, leadership, and teaching. I don't think there is a better instructor in the United States than Ann Burgess here. And, I was fortunate because, being in San Diego County, from my career, we had, Scripps La Jolla.
Mm.
So we had the trauma center down there. And I can tell you, whenever a victim would be brought in, the officers would transport them down there. Even as an investigator, you couldn't get through those doors until that nursing team was done. And, but I just love you guys so much. So, okay. So the next question I have, your work is focused extensively on assessing and treating victims of trauma and violence. But what are the most effective strategy for helping these individuals heal and recover?
One of the most important things is that they get support after they're through the exam. And that's a problem, mainly because there's still so many myths out there and victim blaming. And one of the reasons why we still don't even get 50% of victims reporting. It's a problem not only for us on campus sexual assault, but it also in the military is a problem of getting, because very often the offender is known and might even be higher rank if it's in the military, or the victim, if it's in a campus setting, doesn't want to see the young man expelled. So it's hard. It's really hard, and then they have to see them.
Right.
So these are some of the rather thorny, we call them, problems that we have facing us in the. So helping them means to do a lot of education about being very non-judgmental. Whenever you hear any kind of a story, it's not up to us to judge. It's up to us to support. And, somebody falls and breaks the leg, they don't say to you, well, what were you doing tripping on, not watching where you were walking. So we have to kind of try to help them with that mentality, that the things that help people are being supportive, offering to do little things that are kind and encouraging. The other thing that's I have found very important is to get victims together that have had similar kinds of experiences so they can talk about it.
Like a group setting?
At a group setting, yes. And rape crisis centers are very good at that because and especially now, a lot of it is done by Zoom. So you can get people all over the country. I know that I've had a couple of cases where a victim was in her own hotel room and the offender manages to get in.
Yep.
Now that's a very specific kind of it's still a rape, but it's still, they spend so much time. How did he get in kind of thing. So talking with somebody else that's had that experience is really helpful. That's what I suggest. And trying to get more males to come forward. That's always hard.
Yeah.
So the group work, I think, is important. And I'm a big proponent of activity. I think action is a good antidote for anxiety and depression. So I get them trying to get into a martial arts program or some kind of sports activity that is not solitary, maybe tennis, maybe other kinds of things.
Keep both of the mind and the body moving in the same direction for PTSD. How big of a role does that? Well, that's a bad question, but in PTSD, post violence of those types of attacks, when do you typically start to see that evolve and presenting itself?
You usually see it right away because it's just the mind is reacting and it just keeps popping back in the mind. And that's what they say is, I can't get it out of my head. And that is hard. That's why you want to get as many other kinds of things to put in the head, so to speak, so that I don't like to see students miss school if they can help it. I know they won't be operating at 100 miles an hour, but you've got to get them kind of back in the game. So those are, PTSD is a very tough one to. Now there's an area where there should be some research. They had thought that there might be some kind of medical medicine that could be, I never saw that go anywhere. So obviously that didn't work out. I just had seen some notice of that. But it's, we still think that the talking about it and the getting it out in the open and not having people blame the victim for anything, and to get the offender. Those are still the important things. We don't put enough attention on the offender.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one time in my career where I actually almost lost everything in terms of, I had in California, the penal code section is 261.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, she was the wife of an FBI agent, and they had a domestic.
Mm-hmm.
She left with her kids, went to a hotel. Suspect broke in, to your point, and she had a 14-year-old daughter there, and he also took care of violated that. And anyway, I had her at the trauma center in Scripps, and the husband showed up, and he started walking into the hallway there, and I said, well, unfortunately you can't go down there. That's she's in an exam and she won't be done until they say so. And he says, well, you're not going to stop me. And I said, well, actually I am. And unfortunately it got into a little push shove, and I said, look, when she is out of there, and this is a case that stuck with me for my whole career, and I'm still talking about it today. And he goes, essentially, he says, well, that's my wife. And I said, yeah, but she's my victim, and I trump you tonight. And so you're going to have to wait here in the hallway. I swear to you, Ann, the doors open, right? The docs come out, the nurses come out. Okay. I went in there and I said, look, your husband's out in the hallway. Would you want to see him? And she said, yes. And he came in the room, honest to God truth, first words out of his mouth, what did you get yourself into?
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
I went ballistic.
Sure.
Okay. And they were holding me back. The docs grabbed me because I grabbed him and I pulled him out into the hallway.
Yeah.
And but anyway, that I think that's one of the reasons where like you, we've seen, we know how violent these crimes are, and it's just amazing how ignorant people can be sometimes.
It is. It's unbelievable. Yes. And those cases stick with you, of course.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Okay, you've provided training and consultation to law enforcement agencies worldwide and healthcare professionals. How do you approach cross-culture differences in your work? And what have you learned from your experiences working with such diverse populations? I mean, you worked all around the world, and not everybody sees it like we see it here.
That's right.
How do you deal with that?
Well, you have to know what the prevailing culture is. You're absolutely right. You cannot treat them as we necessarily do here in the States. And there are certain kinds of things. I've learned this from working with the group Native American Indians. They have many very important rituals that have to be put into place when somebody is hurt or injured in some way. So those are some of the important things to know. Who is the first person? Even like having a baby. That one case of the Savannah Gray Wind, the mother was so upset. The mother of the victim was so upset because when there's a baby, the first person to touch it should be the mother, the grandmother. It should be the grandmother. Mm-hmm. And that didn't happen, and they wouldn't. So it was those kinds of things that you have to work with the family over. I think that's important. I remember one Asian case where the brother was the one that the doctor told what happened, mm-hmm. Rather than the victim. So the hierarchy, I guess you could say, in the culture is important. Certainly I've worked with Asians and, of course, Native American Indians. Those are the primary ones in the Boston area that I had opportunity. And then after the fact, I've worked with a number of where the culture is important. So my advice is find out about the culture and what is the issue when there's somebody has been injured, hurt, or raped. If they have, sometimes they may not even discuss it. It can be. I was looking at a recent report that came out on how many OBGYN doctors even know much about the Muslim, the what they do, these procedures they do for Muslim women, in the what they call it. But anyway, they didn't know that, and it's important that they would know it. At this one school, one university, they had 15 cases. And they have to do exams. It's a very different exam. So to answer your question, even the exam can be different. Even the what is discussed can be different. Languages issues, all of the above. Luckily, more journals are including diverse cultures and explaining certain things, whether it's a medical disease or whether it's an injury. So you have to really keep up and watch. If there's so many webinars out now, so that's always a good way to find out, and to get people who are from different cultures to speak. Anytime you have a roundtable, it's always good to get that. And probably with the offender, it's the same, that there have to be in law enforcement, how you approach could be quite different.
Yeah, and that's what I love about Boston. It's such a melting pot. You really do have an opportunity to have such diverse views and experiences, and that the power of that translating into the ability to help the victims. I don't think there's a price tag you can put on that as a whole.
Right.
So you've written over 20 books, Anne. Absolutely amazing. Which ones are you the most proud of, and why?
Well, I write books in different areas. I began by writing in my own field, psychiatric nursing. What is a psychiatric nurse? How do you do it? So my first one, of course, you always remember your first one. I really like that. And then I would go into, many of the books were also on my research. So we would have child abuse. I had textbooks there. And then with the sexual homicide, of course, was a book from the project with Bob Ressler and John Douglas. And the other textbook out of that, it was Crime Classification Manual. So those would be the ones I'd say. But the best one, of course, is A Killer by Design. That was a real challenge to do, because don't forget the data went back to the 80s and 90s. But luckily, we had all of the tape transcribed meetings that we had with the agents. So all of them are on tape. And that was fun to write. Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah.
So when you see some of the things taking place today, and let's use the Idaho situation as an example.
Sure.
What struck you right away in the Bryan Kohberger case? What
struck me right away is I always tried, first of all, you always look at location, and we didn't know this was going to be in a house where 4 young people were found, and the weapon was different. That was a blade weapon that we heard. And so it was in the night. So it was a blitz attack. So you can begin to work those characteristics into what kind of a person would do this, because you're always looking for your suspect. So it had to be someone that could see at night. That always was a curious thing, is how did he see to know to go in the rooms? So had to have been some kind of a light. And that's where we got some information that outside somebody was walking their dog had this light on there. Maybe that's what he had. Could he have had his cell phone? Those are just the questions you put to the side. But it was a blitz attack. Somebody had to be very strong to get 4 young people who he couldn't have been too old. He had to have been within I always felt he was within the 20-year range, more likely towards the older end than the younger end. This didn't seem like a teenager doing that. Had to have been someone that was probably a part of the academic world.
Mhm.
Obviously, not necessarily from that same school.
Right.
Did
Which
you?
you nailed. Yeah, you nailed that piece of it.
Right, right.
Right.
The vehicle, how did he get in? How did he get out? Was he just walking by and did it, or did he have a kit and bring it in, or did he drive? Could he have driven? That we asked Ed Kemper, and the first thing that Kemper, he hadn't heard about the case, but we took I had the journalist who works with him take photos that were on the internet, and his first question was about the car. He said, "All those cars. I want to know what's in who's all those cars." And look at it. Now, obviously at that time it wasn't his car, but that was his first. And law enforcement does a lot of work by nailing down the car. And I think that was probably one of the, if you want to think that the person they have is the right one, the car would be critical. So those are some of the things. I think the other thing that was very, very helpful was watching the drive that area, because remember, they weren't giving us any information initially. So
Right.
just seeing where the house was, knowing there was a dead end one part and so forth, all of that, and it had trees, and it was kind of easy for someone with trees. It wasn't like it was an apartment building or something like that. So all of those things just initially were the ones that went through my head.
What I love about being an investigator is able to put that stuff in front of such the brightest minds. I mean, you see Dr. Bricato's chiming in here. He says, "Ann, watching you tonight, a fantastic interview." And now you guys are involved in some heavy duty research right now.
Yes.
What about that work, and how's it going?
Well, one research question I can ask you, because you're a good investigator: does it matter if the victim is in a strangulation case, if it's manual strangulation or ligature?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Well,
Yes.
that's one of the things we're looking at. Does it help in any way in pointing toward a suspect?
Yes, because, and I use John Benet Ramsey as a good example. That the weapon there, and I've had many conversations in a room full, of homicide guys, and the first question I ask them is, how many know what a grot is?
Yeah.
And you will be surprised how many homicide guys, and more than anybody, a very few put their hands up, and the ones that do typically tie it back to a military background of some sort. And so those types of weapons, either hands and or a device, that's critical in understanding the mind of the offender.
Sure. Yeah, because in that case, they were trying to point towards the parents, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was,
yeah. And what you just said doesn't make any sense for the parents, certainly not for the mother, unless the father had military service. I mean, and anyway, good point. Good point. Yeah.
so you guys are discovering some great things there. And so let's talk about what advice you would give to students or young professionals. And forgive me for looking away. I'm just reading my notes here. Okay. I don't want to get them. I don't want to get it wrong. So forgive me. What advice would you give the students or young professionals interested in pursuing a career in forensic nursing? And what qualities do you think are essential for success in that field?
Well, qualities that are successful for forensic nursing is what you're taught in like nursing arts 101, is what to observe, how to observe it, everything about the body. You have to notice every little thing about the body. So what's there, what isn't there, kind of thing. So the skills learned in terms of observation and the skills learned in dealing with removing anything from the body is important. You just can't scrub things, and you just can't pull things off and things like that. Those are the physical things you do, but then the counseling and the talking with the victim is critical, absolutely critical. So that's also taught even before you get into a specialty area. So the nurse comes in with very good basic skills. Then to specialize, then they only have to learn. There was a whole protocol and a curriculum for specializing. The nice thing about nursing is you can be any, quote, type of nurse. You can be a med surg nurse, you can be a pediatric nurse, you can be a community nurse or a psych nurse. And it is, that's what is important about, I think, the nursing field. We now have a lot of women and men. I've encouraged some that are not nurses, who are just university students. When they graduate, they're thinking of coming back and getting what we say, for 2 years. I think it's only 2 years and 2 summers. They can be eligible for boards to take their RN boards and also end up with a graduate degree. And we're seeing that because they're saying that there's so many jobs available for nurses that aren't necessarily available for other fields that they're coming in. So those are the critical skills, I think, that what nursing has.
How, being an active listener would be critical. How do you think social media is impacting those listening skills?
Well, hopefully, from a standpoint of knowing when something is worrisome, that we have to do better there of who to report to. I had a recent case where the young woman was driving in her car and felt she was being followed, and every time she turned, and she really felt, she was worried enough to call the local police. And they said they would love to help her, but she couldn't get the plate number, so that she was at a disadvantage. But educating people on social media, I think, is so important, and having them have an ear for a red flag. Is there something there that really should be notified? I think we have got to start doing that, because so much is coming out on social media. The forewarning, so to speak. And the other thing is we need to get better, I think, at getting into different rooms. Some of these group rooms, I guess, I don't know what else to call them. And that might be where there's a lot of this hate business going on. It's almost getting like every week there's something going on that we have to, we need to let people know what is a red flag, what is a warning sign, that someone's got a gun, they're going to do something, they want to. And as I said, some of our work we're doing now is to look at the themes, the worrisome themes, and how they come up in writings and verbally, and get that information out to people.
Yeah, pre-incident.
Yep. Social media is where it's going to be. That's the next big area we've got to put attention to.
Yeah. There's so much behavior being put into the public arena. We do have to get into.
Yeah, the recent one at a birthday party. People are going to. This is getting.
Well, I saw a documentary recently about the proliferation of pornography. Not that I want to go down that lane.
Yeah.
Okay, but where I'm talking about how desensitized our children and our grandkids are being exposed to stuff, and it's just like this. What are we doing? And I'm not saying that all of it obviously drives, into people like us, or we start analyzing that person, that's few and far between. But I think this younger generation, you have kids as young as 10, 11, 12. By the time they hit that number, I saw a statistic that almost 40% of them have been exposed to some serious stuff.
Sure.
And so that leads me into the research. What's coming? What's coming? What's out there?
Well, one of the things that can be done, and I encourage law enforcement to do it, and they probably are doing it, is anytime they're looking at a suspect, you want to know what's on his hard drive. You've got to get hold of that, or any writings, anything like that. and see what are they listening to, hearing, and what are they sending back.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you see these guys even on the spring break, the news where you just look at YouTube. Anybody can look at these kids on YouTube, and guys are just walking up, and it's a free for all. And what was fascinating, I saw a documentary the other day about Taylor Swift.
Oh.
Okay, I've got granddaughters. Okay, and she got caught up on with a photograph of a guy inappropriately touching her. Seven witnesses, and they sued her because the guy lost his job, and she had to go to court in Denver, and she ultimately won, and that was kind of a catalyst for one of her albums. But are we that far that we're past feeling that far that we don't have a clarity? I don't know. And this is my opinion. Just
is the genie out of the bottle?
It is.
I worry about that. I really do, with all that you're saying and all that's available to young people. I've often said and I've learned this through working with juveniles, many times an incident can happen. A lot of kids go through and it doesn't bother them, but there's going to be one that it does. And for whatever reason, you've got to get to that one. And before it's too late, before they do something really bad.
Yeah.
So
Amen.
That's the research area.
So also the other side that people forget, your work is not only in forensic nursing, but you're also a psychiatric nurse.
Yes.
And how do you see the intersections between these two fields? And how does your background in psychiatric nursing inform your work, or help you inform your work with victims of trauma and violence?
Sure. Well, psychiatric nursing deals with the mind and human behavior. So that's what my specialty was, and that's what I learned. So it gets applied to whatever situation I'm in. Luckily, I got into the trauma field because of Linda Holmstrom, well before it was even called trauma. Remember? None of this existed. This is all new language that we have.
Yep.
So that was important. Now it's called trauma-informed care rather than victim care. Fine, we've given a new name. People can learn it and apply it. But it really is just basic. I also have a background. My background is more in psychoanalytic, psychotherapy kind of background. And I try to apply that, try to get at what is the etiology? Why is someone doing what they're doing? And it usually goes back to something that has happened in childhood that could well be forgotten. And yet it still stays at some kind of subconscious level and comes out in the crime. I think that's what and I won't say I enjoy it, but it's a learning piece, is to take a crime and really try to analyze it. It's like in this Idaho case, there's got to be something, I hope they can get to it, and I don't know whether they will, that really in the suspect that they have that happened, and look at his time level. The 2 years that we don't know anything about were critical years. He was 18 or 19. And something happened, I bet, earlier on that comes out in those 2 years, and then later, obviously, when he's quite a bit older. But something, I bet, happened. So I hope to find it.
I hope the prosecution team calls you and Gary to go sit down with this guy and see what's there.
I'd like to sit down with the mother.
Well, I know, they slapped my mother. I told you that a long time ago when we first met. The people don't believe me. When I was born, they slapped my mother. No. Okay. What do you enjoy most about your work? You're such a positive influence on so many people. Again, I know I say that, but I believe it because I see it in you, and I've witnessed it. And so what motivates you to continue to push forward in this field?
What motivates me is teaching.
Okay.
is I really enjoy teaching and I enjoy students. Not all students. So 99% of them. I have a big jar on my desk that are for ashes of problem students. So they all behave when they come in my office.
That's funny.
Yeah. So teaching, I think, and that's why I like to do cases, because I get very interested in each case, and then I feel I can teach something from it. So I try to keep myself very current.
Yes, you do. And so that's going to be a very interesting segue into this question. What do you see as the most significant contribution you've made in the field of forensic nursing, and what are you most proud of in your career, as part of your career?
Well, I would say advancing the field of victimology. I don't think we talked about that until all this started, but victimology is now a very big. In fact, I think when I even wrote a textbook on victimology, there was like one or two in the field. So I feel that and that's something that the agents have really picked up on. And when you see them and you watch them, and that's fascinating to watch them profile a case, and you've probably been involved in it, where you all sit around and look at things, is they start with the victimology.
Yep.
So that I would say, and then of course the sexual assault nurse examiners. I think that's a wonderful advancement in my field. Mm-hmm. So I would say those are the two most important contributions, I think.
Are you seeing this next generation of forensic nurses raising the bar even higher?
Yes, because I told you about that blog that every day there's a new question there, so that I see what they're doing all around the country, mm-hmm. and the kinds of questions they're asking and how they share. Now they can really share who has had a problem with, and then they'll say, or how do you handle this? And so it's a good quality. It's a very good quality, and that it has kept on. That their sexual assault nurse examiners it's really here. It's in the system, so to speak.
Yeah, it's in the environment, right?
Yeah.
In the ether.
Yes.
Awesome. So, are you up for some questions from our audience?
Oh, love to. Sure.
Okay, so guys and gals, this is your opportunity to go one-on-one with the legend, Dr. Burgess, who, by the way, the character in the show Mindhunters, Dr. Wendy Carr, was based on her life. And I've got one here. How do I become involved in forensic nursing of 25 years? Just moved to Massachusetts. Thank you. Pooh's Blustery Day. Love that name.
Oh, I love it.
So,
Blustery Day. Yes, she can take the course for being a SANE is given through the Department of Public Health. And it's I don't know. You have to Google it, but that would be the first thing, I think. She's got 25 years. That's wonderful. She's got good experience, and they are on call. Usually, the SANE nurses are on call. So I think a 40-hour curriculum, and obviously it's online so that it's convenient. So that's what I'd suggest for her. She wants to do their online classes. Pittsburgh State University has a forensic program.
How do you propose to deal with the gender dysphoria issue? I think that's kind of a moving target right now, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of. I've been reviewing articles for publication on that.
Okay,
and so that is it's a very current issue, as you say, and it is interesting. It's very interesting to get into.
Okay, so this one, what books is Dr. Burgess reading lately? If you say,
I wish I had time to read books. Oh, jeepers. I can hardly find time to walk my dog.
So,
does Shannon have a suggestion?
Yeah, Shannon, do you have a suggestion for her? That's a great one. How has profiling changed tremendously with social media, and studies on how offenders select platforms and use social media? Thank you.
Oh, that's a very current question. Very good, vet girl. RUBUS. Okay. Um, well, the platform that they select is going to tell you obviously something about their own background, so that's important. And we need to get you need to have a little kind of cheat sheet to to know which is which. So I've been trying to keep myself up on. That's what I'm reading. Tell Shannon that's what I'm reading is some of these platforms. So the studies are, and you learn from the studies because they're going to pick platforms that support their ideology. Ideology is so important, and the social media. That's what I would suggest. And it has changed. Obviously, that answer to the first part of the question is yes, it has changed tremendously.
Okay, here's one. Do you still play the piano?
No, I don't have time for the piano either. Oh, Kathy, thank you for asking. I do try to play when I find a piano, but if you don't keep up with it, I hit a lot of wrong notes.
That's awesome. So this is an interesting. What about child trafficking? Do we need some type of change? Obviously, what's going on in that field.
Well, my work with on Native American Indians, unfortunately, they are very vulnerable for sex trafficking. And so I've learned a lot about that, and we try to do as much as possible on that, but it's still a big issue. And to get them away from that, with all the people coming across in the border work, I understand they can use children for that. And that's a huge issue. Again, another very top burner issue.
That is a huge issue. Huge issue.
Yeah, that is a good topic, I think, to intermix with some of your guests that have a handle on that.
So here's a good one. How do you cope with emotional and physical stress of working with patients who have experienced trauma? That's a very personal level.
How do I personally cope? I think is what April is asking. Well, the one thing is I usually feel I can offer them something. And I worked with the daughter of a woman just last week who mother has dementia and was sexually abused in the nursing home. And she was frantic because she felt so bad and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, does your mother like music? And what music? Because she has trouble talking with her because she's got the dementia. And she just said that was wonderful. She never had thought. Her mother loved music, and she can take her iPhone in and play it. I said, that will be so good just to sit with your mother and listen to the music and then maybe get her to hum or see some progress there. You'll see her relax. And the music is good for her, for the daughter. So I love music and I listen to music. I always have music on if I can. So that's my coping too.
That's fascinating you say that because that's mine too.
Is it?
At night I have to put on I'll find meditation music or spa music in the background. My escape is a guitar, which is sitting down here on the floor here. And so interesting. Let's see here. Here's a question. Purdue RN. Thank you for your service, Purdue RN. Sounds like you're a nurse. Using research, do you see using AI to rapidly screen for keywords and phrases on social media, then rapidly notifying LE?
Well, she read my mind, right? She listened to us. You absolutely are on target, Purdue. But yes, that is my next big area is machine learning, which is a part of AI. It's not the total, but it is a part. They use different algorithms and so forth. But I think that's where we have to go. We have to find something that can analyze all of these writings or whatever very quickly and give us a risk assessment on
it. Prayer partner Eve, servant of God, do you think there are preventative measures or interventions to help decrease the prevalence of serial killers?
Well, I hope so. That's what the research is all about. That's why we're in this, is if we can get to kids early and people that are on the dark side, so to speak, is what we have to. And that takes us. It doesn't, they're not going to do it themselves. They're not going to come forward and say, I'm having really bad thoughts and so forth. So we all in citizenry have to help decrease this. Even any kind of, it isn't just serial killers, it's these mass murderers that are shooting multiple people.
Yeah.
That's happening. It's every week.
Yeah, it just seems like there's just this loss of stability.
It really is, yes.
And it's and I've been around a couple of weekends, and I went through the 80s and the 90s on the streets, and even back then it was my training officers all came from the 70s and the 60s, and they're all even to this day saying something's going on here.
Yeah,
something's happening.
And it's frightening for us. I think it's really important that we are a potential in a public place. We are a potential. We have to watch. I know law enforcement is trained very well. They never put their backs to anybody. They sit in the back, right? You always watch who's coming at you.
Yep.
So we need to do more of that.
And the scary part of that also is my wife knows exactly what to do if I was ever approached. How about that for
her? Does she know what would she do?
Well, we have this thing. We have a word that,
okay, good.
that I would use. We've got it all figured out, and she knows exactly which direction to go. And this is really a good thing for our audience to remember, that if you're walking on the street, for an example, and a car comes up behind you, do not get in that car no matter what. Even if the suspect points a gun at you, your survival rate is much higher if you run the opposite direction of the car, because that means that subject has to shoot through a window or shoot through a piece of glass, which could deflect that round, and your statistics of survival go way, way up. And my wife wrote a piece on that in our blog. So if you've not seen that yet, go to our blog and you can read about those kind of things. But you want to make sure that do not ever get into a vehicle, no matter what, with a gun, a bazooka, or whatever. Your statistically, your odds of survival are 100% almost. But once you get in that car, that's what we call a secondary crime scene.
Yeah.
And your numbers go way down. So, please pay attention to that piece of the puzzle for yourself. And do you want to say anything about that, Ann?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, I always tell my students, if you're in any kind of a situation, I wasn't thinking so much of a car, do not let them take you to a second location. You have to fight. You have to do, because that is not good. Something awful is going to happen at a second site. They try to take you. Yeah.
Yeah, run. It's your only chance at that point.
Right.
And fight like you've never fought before if you have to. Just fight.
My grandmothers had in my grandmother's day, they had very large hat pins, and they used that as a weapon. A hat pin in the right place can do a lot of damage.
That's right. I love it. I love it. Oh, what we learned from those who were before. Well said. Well said. Okay, so I've had you for an hour and 15 minutes, and let's tell everybody about your book, A Killer by Design.
Okay.
Tell us about your book, and where can they get it?
Oh, they can get the book at Amazon. That's one place they can get it. I'm sure they can get it at other places. I don't know enough, but certainly Amazon has it. And it talks about profiling. It's really a historical book on how the agents develop their profiling. Agents down at the FBI Academy, and it's all actual real life cases and the agents. talking, I just analyzed some of the sessions that we had. And the cases in the book, we tried to put in a number of different cases. There was a child case, which little Opal Horton, which is very important. That was one of my, when you talk about cases that you always remember. And that was Missy Ackerman with a little girl. Two little girls were on a sunny Mother's Day in May, were out riding their bikes. A guy comes up in a car, just like you were just saying, and asks directions to the city. And he said he couldn't hear them. So he said, "Come here. I can't hear you." And with that, he grabs Opal, throws her into the car, and goes back for Missy. And Opal, amazingly enough, tries to get out, but it's got the no handle, no passenger side handle. So it was set for a kidnapping. So she went out the window that he had thrown her in. She was very smart, and she ran and hid behind a big John Deere, and he did get Missy. And that's been just really, really tough on her. Obviously, we had to work with her, but she was very helpful in giving us a description of the assailant. They put a picture out and a description of the car. And by golly, they had stopped him earlier that day for either a tail light or some mechanical problem, and they could have arrested him. Well, they couldn't have arrested him, but they could have stopped him for something.
Yeah, they probably got an FI on him. That's probably a field interview how they got him,
and that's how they knew they had him, and then they went back. And then we have other cases in the book, of course.
Charles Manson got stopped in his bread truck in Oceanside back in the 60s. And he was given a ticket for a taillight by the CHP officer's name was Rick Wills. And that's one of the things that put him in SoCal at the time. When LAPD, they did a search and they found that taillight ticket. So it's crazy how these little pieces of the puzzle all.
Berkowitz, David Berkowitz, didn't they get him with the ticket?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Parking by something. Look at how many cases with the car.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so anybody else got some questions for Dr. Burgess? We still have a couple more minutes. I don't want to keep her here forever, but I have bear spray. This is a good one. Bear spray is great.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
That's
where did you get it? Desert Sunset.
Yeah.
Where does she get? Where do you buy it? In a store?
You can probably get it online at Amazon.
Oh.
Okay. I absolutely think that's a great idea.
I like that one.
And I totally agree with you, Fuzzy Doxy. She is a very wise woman.
That's great.
And let's see here. Cell phones down. Vet Girl has some great ideas. Pay attention, aware of surrounding, earbuds out, one or none.
Good. Yeah, keep the earbuds out when you're walking.
And I have a niece up there. She's going to BU, so.
Good.
But and I've given her a ton of conversations about this. Just pay attention to what you're doing, especially on the subways and stuff when you're going underground.
Yes.
So wasp spray. Here's another wasp. You guys got some great ideas.
Oh wow! Yes.
Really great wasp spray.
And with me always. Did you have to use it, Babs 22?
Oh my goodness, this is a great idea.
That's great. You've got some great listeners. Let's
see here. Pepper spray. Yeah, the pepper spray doesn't work as good as those other two. I'll be honest with you. Because
I like the bug spray. I don't know where to get the bear spray, but
I like the bug spray. It's going to be interesting
how many one, that shoots.
It's going to be interesting how many of your students are going to come back and say, "I saw you all I bought," and they're going to all of a sudden out of their backpacks and everything comes all these things. Well, I'll tell you, Dr. Burgess, it has absolutely, as always, been amazingly delightful to have you hear the to share your wisdom, your experiences. And I think if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to give you, as always, the last word. And okay, wait a minute. I have one more question that just came in for a second. I
Okay.
think you should answer. Would Ellie require a specific degree in psychology to work in the behavioral health department?
I don't, not a specific degree. No. Do you think?
No,
You- no.
no. You can work in, now if you're going to go to the BAU or anything like that, or get trained as a profiler, then they look for those higher degrees for sure.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yep. But anyway, so you have the final word. I'm going to go ahead and get out of your way here. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, both Karen and I, and of course, little buddy, who's over here.
I dare him.
He's over here playing. We got him a new toy, and he's off into the background. So thank you so much, Anne, for coming here. It is so great to have you, and I hope you have an amazing day tomorrow with the Boston Marathon. I know they run right near your house, so enjoy your day. And I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, and you have the last word.
Okay.
And then we're going to go to Hawaii, okay?
In Hawaii. Okay, right. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me. I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of your show tonight. And my last words for tonight would be, I am looking forward to tomorrow in the marathon. I think that is an important time for us to remember how quickly and how close tragedy can happen. They didn't have any, as far as I know, didn't have any awareness. They did later learn that those two brothers were planning something. They were going to be planning the 4th of July. There is they have a big park in Boston where they were going to have a big concert, and they had planned that. And for some reason they went to this one, which would have been, it was April, obviously. And so we do think of them, and the 3 that did not survive, and well as the many that did need attention. The Boston hospitals, the only reason I think that so many did survive, even though they had horrible limbs amputations and so forth, is because of they're close to the Boston hospitals, and they took the injured to them. The one thing that they ran out of is amputation bags. I can remember being horrified at hearing that, but there were so many that had to have amputations, and that's not something that hospitals keep in their supply closet. So please keep them in your thoughts and prayers. And as usual, I would say anything about victims is to keep your ear open for any way that you can be helpful to victims and their families. And I've been talking lately about the victims of the offender's family. That I've had Carrie Rawson on to talk to my students, and it's very important that we realize that the victims of they are victims too, in terms of having a family member that commits a horrific crime. And I had, as well as I have victims, on this past Wednesday, I had both Carrie on, and I had a victim of Larry Nassar. He was the orthopedic surgeon, doctor at the Michigan State University that had hundreds of victims that over the decades of years he had sexually abused. And I am especially reminiscent of that case because she talked about how the FBI believed him, that he was so good, that Larry Nassar was so good in saying that what he was doing to the young medalists or young girls was helping them in their whatever injury they had. Obviously, it was going to be some kind of a thigh or leg problem. So we need to remember the victims of actual abuse and trauma, as well as the families, and that we owe some consideration to the families of offenders who were in no way involved. Carrie Rawson is a very interesting young woman to listen to and to hear her perspective. So that's what I would say. I hope everybody does have that the weather holds for our run tomorrow, and that everybody has a good spring. I think we're still into spring, at least here in Boston. And thank you again very much. And
hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away.